On the 24th of April, 1964, a Socorro police officer named Lonnie Zamora broke off a chase to follow a roar and a flame into the desert outside town. What he found has been argued over ever since, mostly about whether to believe him. But the part never explained is not what Zamora saw. It is what he left investigators to measure. Not a rumor, not a memory that sharpened with age, not a tale that grew in the retelling. The marks were in the ground, and the brush was still smoldering before the town woke up. And one detail from that scene was deliberately kept out of the early accounts, held back by the investigators themselves. So what does it mean when a case leaves physical traces, survives an investigation this broad, and still ends with nothing identified? I want to start with the ground, not with what Zamora says was standing on it. Everyone who tells this story reaches first for the two figures in white. But the thing that outlasted the argument is duller than that and harder to wave away. It is the dirt. Roughly 1 mile southwest of Socorro, New Mexico, up a rough gravel road on a mesa crest above a dry arroyo, 4 impressions were pressed into the desert floor. Nearby, patches of brush had burned. Those marks were photographed and measured the same night by people whose job was to write down what they saw and nothing more. That is what makes this case unusual. Not that a man reported something impossible. Men report impossible things constantly. It is that within hours there was something physical to examine, and within weeks the federal government had examined it. Strip away 6 decades of retelling, and 4 things remain. We will get to all 4. I am not going to tell you what landed there. I am going to tell you what was in the soil the next morning, and what happened when people tried to test it. Lonnie Zamora was not looking for anything that afternoon. He was a Socorro police officer, working a 2 to 10 shift, driving a 1964 white Pontiac patrol car, chasing a speeding vehicle south out of town. Ordinary work. Then he heard a roar, and he saw a flame in the sky to the southwest, and he let the speeder go. His first thought was not a spacecraft. His first thought was a dynamite shack. There was an explosive storage building out that way, and a man who patrols a small desert town knows where the dangerous things are kept. He thought it might have blown. That is the instinct of a working officer, not a man primed for wonder. I have spent the better part of 2 years with the Socorro file, and 4 months of that with the laboratory results alone. In all of it, the single line I keep returning to was not written by Zamora. It was written about him when the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, sent Special Agent D, Arthur Burns Jr., to the scene. Burns described the officer as sober, industrious, conscientious, and not given to fantasy. Not given to fantasy. I have read that phrase in that federal report dated the 8th of May, 1964, perhaps 40 times. It is the assessment of a federal agent, recorded in the days after, about the temperament of the only man who saw the thing itself. Not a drifter, not a fantasist, not a man chasing attention, a uniformed officer halfway through an ordinary shift. That is who we are dealing with. And around him, the town went on being a town. 21-cent gasoline, the Loma Theater, grocery advertisements running in the same newspaper that carried the story. So here is what he said happened, in the order he said it happened, and I want to give it to you plainly, because the plainness is part of the evidence. He heard the roar first. Not a blast, not the sharp crack of dynamite he half expected, a roar. In his own words, the noise was a roar, not a blast, not like a jet, not like a jet. Hold on to that, because a man who lived near Air Force bases in 1964 knew what a jet sounded like, and he went out of his way to say this was not one. He turned the patrol car toward the sound and started up a steep gravel road toward the mesa. The road was bad, loose stone, a sharp grade. It took him 3 separate attempts to get the car over the crest. The wheels spun. He backed down. He tried again. 3 times. That is not the detail of a man in a hurry to reach a spaceship. That is a man fighting his own vehicle up a hill. When he cleared the rise, he saw it. Down in the arroyo, a couple of 100 feet off, a shiny object sat on the desert floor, oval, smooth. No windows he could make out, no wings, no seams that he mentioned. Just a bright, whitish metal catching the afternoon sun, the way polished aluminum does. He would later reach for the word egg-like, and standing beside it on the sand, 2 figures. Here is where I have to be careful, because this is the part the culture has rewritten. Zamora did not describe what you are picturing. He described 2 small figures in white coveralls. Small adults, he said, or large kids. Small adults, or large kids. No gray skin, no black almond eyes, no antennae. 2 people-shaped figures in white, standing near a shiny thing in a ditch, and one of them, he thought, seemed to turn and notice him. He got out of the car, and here is the strangest part. His instinct was still procedural. He radioed in. He reached for the language of an ordinary shift. He told his dispatcher that he was going to check what looked like a possible accident, an overturned car maybe, down in the arroyo. When the dispatcher asked what he was looking at, Zamora said the thing that no fabricator would ever put in a saucer story. He said, "It looks like a balloon. It looks like a balloon." The most extraordinary object of his life, and the working officer reaches for the most ordinary word he has. Then it changed. There was a roar again, louder than the first, and a flame lit underneath the object, blue and orange, pushing down toward the ground. Not an explosion, a sustained, powered roar that he felt as much as heard, and a wave of it that made him turn and run and knock his glasses off as he went. When he looked back, the thing had lifted. It cleared the arroyo, dropped its nose, and moved off low and fast to the southwest, holding close to the ground, clearing the far mountains, and gone. Seconds. The whole departure was a matter of seconds, not minutes, and then the desert was just the desert again. I am not telling you a craft sat in that arroyo. I am telling you this is the sequence a sober officer gave, the same afternoon, and never materially changed, not that day, not to the FBI, not to the Air Force, not in the years after. The story did not grow. If anything, the man told it less as time went on. There is one detail in Zamora's account that I keep coming back to, and it is the least dramatic thing in the file. When he got out of the patrol car to approach, still thinking, remember, that this might be a wreck or an explosion, his radio microphone slipped out of his hand and fell, and he stopped. He reached back into the car, picked the microphone up off the floor, and set it back in its clip. Then, and only then, did he continue toward the arroyo. He put the microphone back. That is the detail that makes me lean in, not the flame, not the figures, the microphone. Because when people invent an encounter, they reach for the cinematic, the beam, the table, the wall of light. They do not reach for a dropped microphone and the small, automatic act of a man tidying his patrol car before he walks toward the impossible. Fabricators smooth things out. They do not leave the microphone on the floor. This detail sits in the contemporaneous record, not in some later, embroidered retelling exactly the kind of thing that should not be there if this were invented. Now I have to stop and give the other side its best version, because it is a strong one, and I have been a skeptic my whole working life. I take it seriously. I want to say that directly. The strongest reading of Socorro is that it was staged. Consider what the case actually rests on. One primary witness saw the object and the figures. 1. The physical marks are marks a person could make. The laboratory tests, as we will see, found nothing exotic, and the nearest radar that might have caught something was, on that day, not operating. The skeptic Philip J. Klass, for whom Socorro was his first major UFO investigation, concluded it was a hoax, staged to draw tourists to a town that could use them. Others pointed at the New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology just up the road and suggested students had rigged the whole thing as a prank. This raises a simple but critical question. Can the hoax explanation be ruled out? The honest answer is no. Not impossible, not disproven, not ruled out. The hoax reading survives, and I want to say that plainly before I say anything else. What I will add is this. In 60 years, no one has produced the student who did it. No one has produced the apparatus. and the marks and the burning were documented almost immediately before the crowds arrived. The hoax reading survives. It has just never been filled in. So follow the evidence, link by link, and watch where it goes. Link 1. It is created the night of the 24th of April, 1964. 4 rectangular impressions in the soil, each roughly 16 inches by 6, about 2 inches deep. Inside and around them, patches of burned brush, 3 within the marks, 1 outside, and 3 smaller circular marks nearby, measured and photographed while still fresh. Link 2. It is examined. The Air Force takes soil samples. It analyzes the burned brush. A Geiger counter is brought up from the base to check for radiation, and here the record offers one of those human details it is impossible to invent. The man running Project Blue Book noted that the staff car sent to the scene got a flat tire on the way. Link 3. The results come back, and this is the part that matters most, so I am going to give it to you in the investigator's own register, plainly. The soil. No foreign residue. No foreign residue. The burned brush. No chemical that could be identified as any kind of propellant. The radiation, normal. Radiation was normal. Let me sit with that for a moment. The tests did not come back strange. They came back empty. There was disturbed ground. There was burned vegetation, and there was nothing in either that a laboratory could point to and call unusual. The most physical case in the file produced the emptiest results in it. Link 4. It is filed. The findings pass into the Project Blue Book record under the officer running the program, Lieutenant Colonel Hector Quintanilla. And when Blue Book itself was shut down, years later, those records went to the National Archives, where they sit today. Link 5. And this is where I have to be honest with you. I followed the samples as far as I could, and the trail ends with the analysis, not with the material. I do not know where those original soil samples are today. I genuinely do not. The findings survive. The present whereabouts of the physical samples I could not establish. That is a gap in the paperwork. It is not by itself proof that anyone hid anything. For a case this well attended, the strange thing is how quickly parts of it stopped being available. Start with the site itself. Within days, the arroyo was ruined not by agents, but by people, hundreds of them. The curious drove out from Albuquerque and beyond to stand where it happened. When the astronomer J. Allen Hynek came back for a second look that August, there was little left at the scene worth measuring. The town felt it too. A newspaper boy I will call R.T., 17 that year, remembered the sudden hunger for the story the papers were gone before supper. He said, I remember because I still had 3 houses left. 3 houses left. A motel clerk I will call Patricia remembered the reporters arriving faster than the rooms could hold them. They left red dirt across the lobby and wanted rooms we didn't have. Rooms we didn't have. The silence was deafening in its own way, buried under noise. A service station attendant I will call M.R. remembered the traffic more than the mystery. Everybody wanted the road first, he said. Then they wanted coffee. And a laborer I will call E.L., who worked near the site in the years after, remembered the pilgrims who never quite found it. Mostly people asked where it happened, and most of them were standing in the wrong place. The scene was not sealed off by the government. It was loved to death by the public. Then there is the detail that was withheld, and this one was deliberate. Zamora reported a symbol, an insignia, on the side of the object, and Hynek asked that the exact symbol not be published, so that any later witness who claimed to have seen the same thing could be tested against a detail only a real witness would know. That is not intimidation. That is evidence control. But it means that, to this day, what was actually on the side of that object is a small, deliberate blank in the record. That is the shape of an absence. And I am not going to pretend a missing paper trail is the same thing as a hidden one. I don't know that it is. I only know the trail is missing. If Socorro were the only case shaped like this, I would be more comfortable calling it a fluke. It is not the only one. Move forward 17 years and cross an ocean. On the 8th of January, 1981, in Aix-en-Provence, in the south of France, a man working in his garden heard a low whistle and watched a gray, oval object descend and settle on his property, a few dozen meters away. It sat for a moment. Then it lifted and left. Where it had been, there was a mark on the ground, a ring, scuffed and compressed, roughly 2 meters across. Here is why this case matters. The French did not laugh it off. The national police, the gendarmerie, came first. Then a formal government body, the study group inside the French space agency, known as GEPAN, took samples, soil, plants. They sent them to laboratories, and the results were not nothing, the way Socorro's were, but something stranger. Soil compressed as if by weight and heat, traces of iron and other deposits, evidence that the ground had been warmed to a few hundred degrees but not scorched, and plant samples that changed more the closer they were taken to the trace. And the official conclusion? After all of it, the samples, the laboratories, the years of analysis, the French file closes on one word: undetermined. Undetermined. They could describe the effects in exhaustive detail. They could not tell you the cause. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision. A witness, an immediate physical trace, prompt official sampling, and a laboratory result that refuses to resolve. New Mexico in 1964. Provence in 1981. 2 governments, 2 languages, the same shape. There is a third if you want it, and I offer it more cautiously. Delphos, Kansas, the 2nd of November, 1971. A teenager reported a glowing object near the ground, and afterward a ring in the soil that would not hold water and seemed to glow. A later analysis found a soap-like compound in the ground. That chemistry explains some of what the ring did. It does not explain how it got there. And the modern reanalysis came from a research group with its own commitments, so I lean on it lightly. I am not saying the same thing landed in New Mexico and in Provence and in Kansas. I am saying the files have the same skeleton, and no one sat down and built it on purpose. When you strip Socorro down to the material that survived the retelling, 4 things remain. And I want to be precise about this. I am not inventing these categories. I am reporting 4 that are already sitting in the file, in the order the record produced them. 1. The immediate trace. 4 impressions and burned brush, recorded the same night, not remembered decades later. This is the thing that separates Socorro from 10,000 lights in the sky, reports there was something to measure by morning. It is why the FBI agent who saw it wrote that the man who found it was not given to fantasy. 2. The 10-minute window. Zamora was not alone for long. Sergeant Sam Chavez of the state police reached him within minutes, and other officers followed, in time to see the depressions and the brush still smoldering before the tourists, before the reporters, before the story hardened. They did not corroborate a craft. None of them saw it fly. They corroborated that something physical, right there, was fresh. This is the same man, remember, who had just told his dispatcher, "It looks like a balloon." 3. The forensic null. The soil, the brush, the radiation, all tested, all normal. In the words of the officer who ran the investigation, no foreign residue. Whatever pressed those marks left nothing of itself behind. 4, and this is the strangest, because it comes from the least romantic source, the unsolved file. After the Air Force checked balloons, aircraft, helicopters, military flights, and even a possible lunar lander test, and came up empty, the man running Blue Book, Hector Quintanilla, still called Socorro the best documented case on record and still could not close it. Best documented. By the government's own skeptic, and still unidentified. Not confirmation, not exotic residue, not a recovered craft. What this investigation produced was a failure to name the source. That is the escalation. The most consequential thing in the file is not a discovery. It is the fact that the people best equipped to explain it could not. So what happened to the machinery that studied this? Project Blue Book, the Air Force program that owned the question and had run since 1952, logged 12,618 sightings across its life. Of those, 701 were never explained. 701, Socorro was one of them. And yet the Air Force's overall conclusion was that nothing in the whole file amounted to technology beyond known science or to visitors from elsewhere. Both things are true at once. Socorro stayed unexplained, and the program that could not explain it still closed the door. It closed in 1969, and the Air Force did not blame Socorro. It pointed to a study run out of the University of Colorado, published in 1968, and to a review by the National Academy of Sciences, and to years of accumulated experience. The records became archival. The program simply stopped. Now there is a darker version of all this. It comes mostly from a single book published in 1978, which argued that agents confiscated evidence, sealed the site, hid anomalous readings, and pressured Zamora to deny he ever saw the figures. I keep returning to how cleanly that version runs against the record we actually have. The surviving FBI report puts the two figures right there on the page. The Blue Book chief reported normal radiation and empty tests. Attribute that darker story to the book that tells it. Do not mistake it for the file. Hynek, for his part, never stopped calling Socorro one of the classic cases, one of the classics. And the question I keep asking is not whether someone buried this. I am genuinely unsure about that. It is whether something quieter happened, a bureaucracy meeting a category it had no box for, and choosing, at every step, the path of least paperwork. So let me say plainly what this case is, and what it is not. What the surviving record shows is not the erasure of Lonnie Zamora. It shows something quieter, and in a way stranger. A bureaucracy that documented the marks, that held back one detail while the case was open, that ran every test it had, that failed to name the source, that filed the thing as unidentified, and then 5 years later closed the whole program that owned the question. And the man himself? The story you may have heard is that ridicule destroyed him, that he was mocked out of his job and broken by it. The local record says otherwise. Zamora stayed with the Socorro Police Department. He later worked for the city in other roles. He retired. He was not erased. He was, if anything, left alone. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The drama here was never a cover-up. The drama is that serious people took a serious man seriously, documented real marks, got real results that pointed nowhere, found no ordinary source, and then let the file stay open. Unidentified does not mean they proved a spaceship. It means they could not name what it was. Not erased, not persecuted, not silenced, documented, tested, and left open. I am not telling you nothing landed in that arroyo. I am telling you the government's own paperwork never closed the question and never erased the man. I want to go back to Lonnie Zamora because the most human thing in this whole file is not what he saw. It is how ordinary he stayed. Think about how that afternoon began. Not with awe, with a dynamite shack. His first thought, cresting that hill, was that an explosive store might have gone up a working officer's worry, mundane and occupational. He radioed it in like a traffic accident. He stopped, mid-approach, to pick a dropped microphone up off the floor of his car. And when the strangest thing he would ever see was sitting in front of him, the word he found for it was balloon. And afterward, the man at the center of what the Air Force called its best documented case did not become a prophet or a recluse. He went back to work. Same town, same department. Later, other jobs for the same city. Then retirement. The encounter did not carry him anywhere. I don't know what he made of it in the years after. The record does not reach that far, and I am not going to invent it for him. What I know is smaller and truer. A man drove up a bad road expecting a wreck, saw something he could not explain, put his microphone back, and finished his shift. So I am left with the questions, and I want to ask them in order, because the order is the argument. What pressed 4 regular impressions into that soil in the space of an afternoon? What burned the brush that other officers saw still smoldering 10 minutes later? If it was staged, then where is the person who staged it, and where, in 60 years, is the apparatus? Why did the soil, the brush, and the radiation all come back with nothing when there was so plainly something there to find? Why did an investigator ask that one detail be kept out of the early accounts, and what does it protect now that we still do not know it? Why does the same shape, a witness, a trace, a sampling, an unresolved result, turn up in a French garden 17 years later, in a language the first witness never spoke? Why did the officer who ran the whole investigation call this the best documented case on record and still refuse to close it? What does that word unidentified actually mean once every ordinary avenue has been walked to its end? Why do we remember the two figures in white and forget the marks in the dirt that outlasted them? And if the machinery built to answer these questions could not, what did it decide to do with the question instead? I have gone looking, in all of this, for the moment where it resolves, the document that closes it, the test that finally names it, the confession that collapses the whole thing into something ordinary. It is not there. I looked. It is not there. The marks were real, and they were measured the same night. The samples were taken, and the samples were tested, and the tests found nothing at all. The file was opened, and the file was closed, and no one, in all the years since, ever crossed out the word at the top of it. The samples were tested, the file was closed, and that word unidentified is still, 62 years later, the last word anyone official has written down.